Welcome to the fourth video in the Premise to Publication series where I take a book idea through the process to hopefully get published. If this is your first video of mine, hi, my name is Caitlin Duncan. I am a traditionally published author and soon to be hybrid author. I post videos on Mondays talking about the writing process and all the bookish things, so be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell next to it if that at all interests you and you want to be notified the next time I upload a video. Before we get started into the editing process for my book, I did want to say a huge thank you to all of my lovely subscribers. We hit over 1,000 subscribers on my channel. I was so excited and I'm so thrilled to have you here. As a thank you, I'm going to do a Q&A. So if you have any questions for me about the writing process, myself, as long as it is within reason, please post a comment below and let me know your question and you will most likely be featured in that video. And again, thank you so much for subscribing. As I said in the previous video of this series, it took about 3 months for me to draft this novel. Now the hangover for me after finishing a book is really cleaning up my house, reorganizing my life, and it sort of helps me figure out what I need to do next. So for me, I don't like to jump right into the editing process. I prefer to give the book a little bit of space, give myself some space, and sort of let my brain work through the process of what needs to happen during my next revision. Now, while I didn't open the document, I thought about it a lot, and mostly during the mundane tasks of cleaning my house and all the cobwebs. I cannot be the only author out there who does this. Do you get really into your work that you forget everything else around you? I cannot be the only one. When I am drafting, I get so close to the book that I can barely focus on much of my life or anything else, which is why this distance is really important in my process. While this doesn't necessarily work for everyone, I know some people who are able to jump right into editing. In the past, I have as well, but it's really not great for my process. I gave myself 2 weeks between the first draft and going into the editing process. When I came back to the book, the space I gave it allowed me to look at it from a different angle. Obviously, I wrote this story. I know this story. It's not like I forgot everything, but when I am in my story, I miss so many little nuances, grammatical errors, continuity issues when I'm just focused on getting the story on the page. The first thing I do after I give myself some space is to do a read through, and I try to do this as quickly as possible to really stay in the story, and that's how I'm able to spot these plot holes, continuity issues, character issues, and I gave myself a week to do this. That may seem like a long time to read a book, but I do dedicate around 2 hours a day to my author business. It's really all I can count on. While I do try to read this book as quickly as possible, I read it on an e-reader, I do take notes as I go. So within the app, I would highlight and make little quick notes, but I tried to make them as quick as I could, and this is also why I put it on a different platform than Scrivener or Word, because I don't want to do any editing during this week that I give myself for the read through. Now, in terms of notes, I looked for plot holes. Usually in my drafts, the earlier part of the book looks a lot different than the end. I catch my groove at some point, usually close to the middle, and then really know what I'm doing toward the end. So when I do go back, I always have to fix my beginning pages. And then sometimes I will create threads in the beginning of the book that don't necessarily go to the end, whether I don't want them at all, or maybe the book has changed at some point. And also, if I do add threads at the end of the book, I want to make sure that I start them somewhere in the beginning. I did look at my characters as well. I did want them to have a journey from the beginning to the end, whether or not they changed too much. Obviously, my main characters do change, but the other characters, I did want to see those little nuances and make sure that all the characters were necessary and they were serving a purpose. And especially with a thriller novel, I wanted to have every single person that the reader reads think is a suspect. And also I looked for consistency throughout to make sure that characters were consistent in their actions and their dialogue throughout the whole book. I also look at description. I don't really put a ton of description in my first drafts. I find that it slows my process. I'm very plot driven, so I just want to get everything on the page, and then I know when I go and do my edits that I have to describe setting, character, emotion, and all of that has to be described a lot more during the editing process. I also looked at pacing. With a thriller, obviously it's a fast-paced book, but there are some parts where I needed to slow down a little bit. Having like high octane pacing throughout the whole book is really gonna make a reader out of breath, and I wanted to make sure that the pacing was consistent throughout. There weren't any really slow parts or a bunch of fast-paced scenes right after another. As I mentioned, I did read my book on an e-reader. If you don't have a physical e-reader, there are a ton of apps that you can use on your phone if you have a smartphone, or you could print it out. It's however you feel that you're able to see the story a little differently than when you wrote it to catch all of these little nuances. My goal for the first round of edits that I do after my draft and then breaking and then reading is to turn this really messy draft that I would never let anyone see ever into something that resembles a story. After that read through, I did go into Word. This has been a process for me since I was published in 2013, where I love Scrivener for my early drafts, where I can have all of the character information, and as I'm going through the creation process, I enjoy having all of that information there. Anytime that I had given my book to an editor, usually they would give me the manuscript back with track changes or comments within the manuscript, and it's just a process for me to sort of delineate that part in my mind where it's like, Scrivener, this is our first draft, Word, this is when we're in editing mode. But that's just my process. I know people who work in Scrivener from start to finish, don't use Scrivener at all and use only Word, can use Google Documents. It's whatever you prefer. I also think Word works very well for me because I am a linear writer and editor. So I have to work from the top to the bottom of the manuscript. And this is not the case with every writer. I am so jealous of writers who can start working at different parts of their manuscript and jump around. I absolutely cannot do that though. One thing I love about using an e-reader and highlighting and taking notes is that I can export it to a document that I can read on my computer screen. I have double screens for my computer, so I like to have my manuscript on one screen and the notes on the other and just go through the book from top to bottom. And this is when I went through each chapter and fixed plot issues, character issues, added description, took away scenes that were no longer relevant or threads as I mentioned, or added whatever was needed. And inevitably I found more issues reading it in Word. And now that I was in editing mode versus reading mode, I was able to work through the book and fix all of the issues that I saw. I gave myself 3 weeks to do this first round of edits, and I aimed for about 3 chapters a day. My schedule consists of working on weekdays only. I don't count on the weekends. That is usually reserved for family time, and so are my nighttime hours. So I did reserve just 5 days a week, and then if I was able to work on the weekends, that was a great bonus. After I went through the entire book and fixed all of the issues that I saw, then I did a grammar check. And along with the native grammar checker in Word, I used ProWriting Aid. And in the past I have used Grammarly, but I recently found ProWriting Aid and I'm so happy with it. Grammarly is fine. It worked for me for years, but I really love how ProWriting Aid, you pay for it once and you get as many updates as they put out. Grammarly, you do have to pay an annual subscription, and I feel that ProWriting Aid works for me because it goes into depth with repetitive phrases and it has different levels of that, echoes in the work, and a lot of features that I actually don't use yet because it is so robust. This is the first book that I've used with ProWriting Aid, and I have to say I really enjoyed the process of using it, and also I feel like the readability of my book is so much better than it was with Grammarly. At this point of the process, I usually get that itch to have more eyes on my book and to give me more of a developmental edit, and this is when I utilize my critique partners. I did a recent video on how to be a great critique partner and also how to use this process to improve your own writing. And in that video, I did mention the importance of creating a timeline or deadline with when you needed feedback. Now, I practice what I preach, so I usually do give a deadline. I have a production schedule where once I start drafting, I know exactly when I want the book to be done. So I did give my critique partners 2 weeks to read the book and to give feedback. During that 2 weeks, I kept myself busy by researching agents. And spoiler alert, that is the next video in this series. Fast forward to when the 2 weeks were over, I received feedback from both of my critique partners, and then I got to work on my next round of revisions. One of my critique partners worked solely in the manuscript, putting comments, and the other one did comments as well, and also gave more of a developmental letter. From those notes from the letter, I broke it down into bullet points, which I do explain in this video on how I do that. I find it helps me focus on what needs to be fixed, other than reading the letter over and over to try to find pieces of information that I need to use to do my edits. Another feature that I love about Word is the ability to combine a bunch of different documents into one. So I took my original document and I took the documents from both my critique partners and smushed them together, and I had one document with all of the comments and the fixes that my critique partners had suggested. And as I said, with my bullet lists, I really like to focus as much as possible, and I didn't want to have so many different documents or windows open, which would not really help me focus. Then I repeated the process of going from the beginning to the end of the book, looking at the different notes that my critique partners left and implementing fixes. Some of them I did leave for my next read through because I wanted to think about how to implement certain scenes based on their feedback. I am a big proponent of thinking about my book when I feel a little bit stuck. I am not the type of person who just writes through it, so if there were a few instances of questions that my critique partners had that I did step away for a bit and came back to later. This also helped me keep moving forward instead of getting stuck in the book and losing that flow of editing. After I went through the book and implemented the fixes that I wanted to, I went back and looked at the notes that I left for myself based on my critique partner's feedback and focused on working on that one issue. They were not broad issues that needed to be implemented throughout the whole book. Most of them were small fixes or scenes to add, just to add clarification to a particular scene. Then the next read through, I used the read aloud feature in Word. I absolutely love this feature. It's another way that I can read the book in a different format. So this is more of an audiobook format where I'm able to catch the way that dialogue sounds and the way that sentences flow. And I use it in tandem with ProWriting Aid. So ProWriting Aid takes a little bit to read the entire document. So what I would do, I would highlight the chapter I'm working on. I would turn on the ProWriting Aid plugin, and then I would listen to the book and correct changes as I went. And this was a serious game changer for me. As I said, ProWriting Aid really helped the readability of my book. And between both of these plugins, I caught so many more errors than I anticipated, which is fantastic. As much as I hate having errors in my book, I know my process. I know I get super close to my book when I'm in it. So I really love having these features available to me so that I'm able to give the cleanest book possible to a potential agent. And this is a fun bonus tip, which I didn't really use in the past. This book has 2 point of view characters, and I have been using the read aloud feature for a while, but I didn't really think about doing this. When I was in the main characters chapter versus the other point of views chapter, I would change the read aloud person. Robot? What are they? AI? I'm not sure. I would change them so then I would hear the voices a little differently and be able to spot nuances within them as well, which I thought was a really fun and interesting tip that I will definitely be implementing for multiple point of view books in the future. Once I reached the end of the book, it had all of the issues cleaned up from my critique partners, any of the comments that I had left for myself or track changes. I cleaned up the book, then I did did the final grammar check with Pro Writing Aid. Now, there wasn't as many issues at this point because I had already gone through my line edits, but this was an opportunity for me to be a little more creative. I did find echoes of words in my books and repetitive phrases. There weren't too many of them, but there were enough that I wanted to make sure that I tweaked them and made them all different so that the book read as best as I was able to make it read at that time. And then my book was done! As I said, next time I'm going to be talking about how I researched agents and how I organized all of that data. So let me know in the comments below, what processes do you use for editing your writing projects? I'd love to know. And if you use any of the features that I mentioned or are interested in them. So if you enjoyed this video, do give it a like, hit that subscribe button and the little notification bell next to it so you know the next time I upload, and I'll see you soon.